unfortunate incident that involved a serious injury to our officer and also the death of the suspect. This afternoon, right at the time, around 3:30 in the afternoon, our officers received a radio call of a suicidal subject who was at his residence at 14067 Stanford. Actually, if you look over my shoulders, it's right back in this area here. It appears from the call notes and from the information that I originally received is that there was a request by Aurora Mental Health that this individual had had contact with them prior. There was also a mental health hold that was on this individual as well. So there was a lot of dynamics related to this individual, how his mental health was and his mental state of mind. With that in mind, our officers responded. They arrived approximately about 5 to 10 minutes after that initial radio call came out. And again, I think it's important to stress what that radio call was about. It talked about an individual that came from an outside agency of Aurora Mental Health. They talked about the safety and the well-being of the suspect, but they also talked about the safety and the well-being of the mother, and I believe it was also a grandparent who lived in that house. And also, I think you have to consider the safety of this entire community. So with that, our officers arrived. They came based on the information they received. They also had the crisis response team, which is known as our CRT team. So again, it was something that was identified early on, and the proper resources were noted and made sure that they did come with this event. Our officers verified the location of where this individual was at based upon the information received in the radio call. And they also verified additional facts related to community safety and the impact of the history of this individual. Our CRT team, our crisis response team, again, these are mental clinicians. They are both one sworn officer and then also a non-sworn professional in mental health. They started to try to make telephonic contact or to phone this suspect. The phone number was a wrong number. At some point, our clinicians were able to make contact with the mother. The mother gave a good phone number, at which time they dialed up that number and started to have a conversation with the suspect who was inside the apartment. As that conversation was going, our officers went to the location and they started to contain it. We had a canine officer, 4 additional officers that worked patrol, and again, as they got on site, the canine officer was in place near the residence to control the location, and our officers began to designate what they would do and how they would handle this situation as the conversation continued to unfold with the clinicians. The clinician began to supply information to our officers that the suspect inside had a knife and that he had threatened to kill himself, kill others, and he also hoped to be killed or kill police officers. That was the information that they had. So the officers that were set up on the location began to look at the event, and they requested additional logistics. They got less lethal. They had a 40mm less lethal tool. They had a taser. They identified someone who would communicate and talk if necessary, and then they also had the canine next with the canine handler. While all that was getting put into place, the conversation that was occurring with the clinicians in the vehicle out in this parking lot here came to an end. They tried calling back the suspect multiple times. Unfortunately, that suspect would not pick up. So the clinicians tried over and over to get a telephonic relationship and a phone call with those inside, with that person inside, and unfortunately that did not come to fruition. With that in mind, our officers stayed on location. They contained the location. They spent approximately about 25 minutes actually at that area as this call continued to unfold. At some point, they looked and they could see the suspect peering out of the window. He had a large, very large butcher knife, and he was holding it to his neck, and he was continuing to make threats against himself and also kill anybody in and around the area, which included the officers. The clinician, again, not being able to get in contact via the phone, made a determination that they would come up near the residence and try to establish a verbal contact. And hopefully, again, what we hope for on this, to be really frank with everyone, what we hope for is, again, the verbalization, the communication would de-escalate this incident. Unfortunately, again, the suspect made a determination that he was not going to communicate, he was not going to talk. As our officers continued to stand in a containment position, again, they were not in the process of getting into the apartment, they were not in the process of breaching any doors, they were strictly in a containment position outside, hoping for a good conclusion to this event. Unfortunately, the suspect, without any warning, without any verbalization, and unfortunately without any discussion, burst out of his front door and began to run around the corner. Containment saw this individual. They began to make verbal contacts with him to say, stop, stop. It was also observed that there was a large, again, as I mentioned earlier, a very, very large butcher knife. The suspect turned, the canine officer who had his dog in and around the area, we don't know if the canine made contact, began to be charged by the suspect. And I'm not talking charged by, I'm going to just kind of approach. I'm talking a full speed, head-on charge. The suspect had the knife in an upward position, and he began to thrash and stab the knife into the head of the canine officer. The stabbing was so aggressive and it was so forceful that a portion of that knife actually broke off in the head of our canine officer, and it is presently in the process of surgery. As all this was occurring, and again, this was not a matter of minutes that this contact occurred, it was a matter of seconds. As this was occurring, the other officers on site used the 40mm less lethal tool with no impact. They deployed a taser with no impact, and simultaneously, from what it appears at this point, the officer who was getting stabbed in the head aggressively, repeatedly, and tragically fired his weapon, struck the suspect, and the suspect dropped to the ground, at which time the officer also dropped to the ground. That is what we ended up with. Our officers that were on scene immediately applied medical attention to the canine officer. They immediately gave medical attention to the suspect. The officer was transported by units, police units that were on scene. He was transported to the hospital. The suspect was transported by a rescue ambulance, where he was ultimately pronounced deceased at the hospital. That is what we know at this time. The history of this event, again, to me is tragic. I do want to say right now that I thank God, and I am serious about that our officer is not dead. I thank God that our officer is in surgery, and I am so thankful that he survived this. This was not something that was taken lightly. This is not an attack that was, by any stretch of the imagination, not incredibly, overtly aggressive. Again, we will look at video, we will talk about video, we will release it in the future. And unfortunately, when you see that video, it is absolutely sickening. Every aspect of this is problematic. Every aspect of this is troubling. And again, like I said, I am thankful that our officer is not dead, laying back there on that sidewalk. The suspect, I do want to give you some background information on the suspect. He is a 23-year-old male black. From what we know at this time, it appears that he has a history of suicidal ideations. We don't know the extent or the reasoning of all that, but that is what we know at this point. The one thing that I want to make clear is how we got here. Again, our officers got a radio call to respond to this, and that radio call came from Aurora Mental Health, and that involved community safety, it involved the safety of the mother, it involved the safety of a potential grandparent who also lived there, as well as the safety of the suspect involved in this. The Aurora Police Department, our patrol assets, our clinicians, our crisis response team did everything that we could possibly do to resolve this without the incredibly tragic conclusion that this happened. I pray for the recovery of our officer. I hope that he is in a place where he is getting the care that he needs. I hope that he has the opportunity to return. I hope that he has the ability to recover from this event. The suspect, again, as I mentioned, he was transported and pronounced. With that, I'd like to open it up to any questions.
Chief, have you been here before for this individual?
Yeah, from what we know now, and again, that's still very premature, it appears that there was possibly one other radio call to this exact location. But that is, again, this is still, and I want to be very clear with everybody, this is still a very early processing part, but we do think that there was one prior call to this location. But what we do know is that the suspect did have prior mental health issues, and the suspect has had contact with Aurora Mental Health and other mental health facilities in the past. Anything else?
You said you guys were out here for 25 minutes before the incident started escalating?
Yeah, approximately. We got on scene right around 3:30 or so. That's when we actually got on scene, and I think the incident occurred probably about 25 minutes later than that. And again, that's still, we're still going through the timeline, looking at it. But the reason I wanted to really put that out there is because this isn't something that was taken lightly. This isn't something that was taken, let's just go up and door knock it and get this over. This is something where our resources, our personnel came together with the proper resources, the proper equipment, the proper tools to effectively deal with somebody who is experiencing mental health issues. That's how they approached this. They made sure that they had a crisis response team. That crisis response team is trained both in sworn and non-sworn to deal with individuals experiencing mental health crises. They tried numerous times to make contact, which they finally did via telephone, which had a negative result, but it verified the fact of what they were dealing with and what we as an organization unfortunately had to deal with. We also made sure that our officers didn't haphazardly force this incident to occur. We did everything but force this. We actually stayed back, we stayed in control, we stayed in containment, and we were working through the process through communication, through de-escalation, and through a lot of various and different options. The reason this conflict or this contact and this event occurred is because that suspect made a very conscious decision to have contact with our officers. That contact involved not just verbal contact, it involved very aggressive, forward-moving death. And I'm talking death to the point that that is where this situation is. This isn't something light. This wasn't a pocket knife that got dropped on the porch or anything like that. This is a large butcher knife that was repeatedly thrust into the head of our police officer. And that is what this officer did that day, and that is what officers do every single day, is put themselves in those positions where they are confronted with situations like that. Again, the time period when we got on scene to when this contact finally happened based upon the suspect's decision to make this contact happen was approximately 25 to 30 minutes. The contact itself, and I want to be very clear about that, the contact itself was seconds. Seconds. I just held 2 seconds. That's how fast that occurred. Any other questions?
Any more on the officer, the canine officer history? Anything more you can say about the officer?
Right now, no, other than the fact he's been on the department. He is a canine. He is working a specialized unit. He is a valuable asset to this department, this organization. He has committed himself to this organization. He has been in canine for many, many years. He is probably one of the most proactive canine officers that we have. His maturity, his oversight, his tactics were evident in what we saw there. The situation that he put himself in, again, I think it speaks volumes about the kind of officer that he is, willing to put himself in those incredibly, incredibly challenging and life-threatening situations.
Mother and grandparent okay?
Yeah, the mother is at headquarters, and the grandparent, we are still trying to verify the circumstances related to that.
The mother was in there with him?
She was not. He was by himself. Again, that was part of this process. We had to track her down. She came into the area, from what I understand, and I'm still working through that. But she came into the area, and once she came into the area, our crisis response team was able to make contact with her, get some history, get some ideas, and get that telephone number, which allowed for the first contact.
Did you say the knife broke?
A piece of the knife broke and is still inside the officer's head. Any other questions? Anything? Again, I would like to, this situation, it is without question a tragedy. The one thing that came out of this that is positive, which is really not positive, is the fact that that officer, our officer, this community Aurora police officer, is not dead. That is about the only positive thing that came out of it. Because of their tactics, their skill, their patience, he survived. And again, to God, I am thankful for that. So thank you very much.
Chief, just to clarify again, we're talking about the canine officer with a canine, is that correct?
Yes, both were on scene.
And the canine is okay?
The canine is okay.
Got it.
Again, which is great, but it doesn't compare to a human. And our human right now is struggling.
Thank you.